So last year when we planted this rose garden, it ended up not raining at all for about 8 weeks, which is not exactly what you want when you're developing plants. And it's so important, especially at their early stages, you want to make sure that they're getting the water that they need to develop nice and healthily. And so this video is kind of my masterclass on how to water to encourage really nice healthy plants. Before we look at how to water, the real question is, when should we water? And like almost everything in the garden, the answer is it depends. You can water early in the morning, you can water late in the evening like today, you can water even in the midday, but of course there are going to be optimum times. Now, after a pretty tough spring, a pretty tough start here in the garden, mainly because of slugs, now everything feels like it's properly getting underway. I feel like I'm on top of it, and part of the kind of strategy that I use to keep on top of slug problems is to not water in the evening, because when you're doing that, the water doesn't evaporate, and it's kind of this lovely invitation for all of the slugs to go, ooh, moisture, yes please. So number one thing, if you're having slug issues, try and water as early in the morning as possible. Now, as time progresses, as your garden gets more full, more healthy, slug issues tend to become less of a problem over the summer months, particularly during July and August. And so if the only time you can water is in the evening, then that's kind of all right. You can get away with that a little bit more. Now, if you're on top of your local slug population, or you at least feel in control, which is the stage that I'm at now, I'm a lot more happy to water in the evening, because watering your garden in the evening is highly efficient. So why is the evening better? Well, it's purely a case of temperature and light levels. If you water in the evening, you don't have the raising of the temperature during the daytime, as well as the sunlight that's going to evaporate that water. And so the water that I've watered here has all night to percolate down into the roots. And so if water is very precious to you, watering in the evening is an absolute must in terms of water conservation. Now, against popular advice, I have no problem with watering during the midday sun. If that is going to be my only opportunity to water my garden, I will absolutely make an exception. Now, in all of the years that I've been watering, especially during the midday, even in a polytunnel, I have never experienced what I would say is a case of sun scorch. I think that is a little bit of a myth, particularly in a climate like the UK. And so if the midday sun is the only time that you can water your garden, that's fine. If you can only get to your garden during the middays, then what you could do is choose maybe more of a cloudy or an overcast day to do your watering, because that at least is going to reduce the evaporation. Because watering in the intense heat, of course, is going to be less efficient, but you're still watering and the plants are still going to get at least something, and that's pretty important. There is another exception I make when it comes to watering during the midday sun, and that's if it comes to transplanting, because what's so important is you can transplant anytime during the day, but you just need to make sure that you put lots of water in the transplant hole and your seedling is going to be absolutely fine. So my permaculture experimental site is completely off grid. There's no mains electricity or mains water, and so I want to make sure that I'm very kind of conservative when it comes to looking after my water levels. And one of the most important aspects of that is using soaker hoses, particularly in an undercover growing setup, but you can also install them outside. So this is my tomato bed, and the tomato plant's looking very vigorous. I'm really enjoying the experiment of letting the suckers, which they're not actually suckers, they're called branches, but letting them grow. And the vigor of the plants is just absolutely incredible. But I don't water this by hand. If you have a really small setup, you might not want to do a soaker hose and instead use something like a spray lance, so you can get nice and low down to the ground, and I'll explain the importance of that soon. But here I've got a soaker hose setup. So a soaker hose is this permeable rubber hose that allows you to gradually water your beds and to keep them watered. So at the moment my soaker hose here feeds into the IBC tank, which is right next to where you guys are at the camera, and it is just super low pressure, and it is a very simple way of irrigating this. And so what I'll do It just depends on the week, but usually every maybe 3 to 4 days, I will set off the soaker hose for a day, and then I'll switch between the two beds. You can attach two soaker hoses together, so you've got 30 meters of irrigation length. This here runs down one end and back the other. It will cover or irrigate 50 centimeters either side of the pipe, and it is just the most hands-free way of watering. You can also bury the soaker hose. That will reduce the evaporation, but for me the real winner is how much time it saves, because all I need to do is plug it into the tap, turn it on, and then at the end of the day turn it off again, and that is this whole bed nicely irrigated. Hello and a very warm welcome to my chili house. I just wanted to show you a simple example of another way that I'm using a micro drip system. This is the Aqua Bloom from Gardena, to water all of my chilies that I've planted here in pots. Each one has a nozzle. This Aqua Bloom can do up to 20 plants at a time. As well, it can lift water by 4 meters vertically, and I can just set it to do a bit of watering once every day or every couple of days. I just need to make sure that the tank is filled up. I will be putting a lid on it, and then away I go. It is very much hands-off gardening, but also super efficient. For me, there are two watering approaches that are absolutely essential for healthy plants. The first one is, when you're watering, try and water as low to the base of the plant as possible, because these carrots here that I've just harvested from the hotbed, it's got all of this foliage, and if I'm watering from the top a little bit like rainwater, all of this foliage is going to be diverting the water off and away from where the water matters, which is the roots of these carrots. And so any time that you can water as low as possible with a hose, or using something like a spray lance, or using something like soaker hoses and micro drip systems, it means that you're getting the water where it actually matters. It doesn't matter about, you're not trying to water the actual foliage, you're trying to get the water down into the roots. And so that's what you want to target. Now, for things like tomatoes, it is so important that you do that, and also for potatoes as well. Anything that is prone to diseases and to things like blight, tomatoes in a polytunnel, you don't want them having just moisture sitting about for long periods of time on the leaves. That can lead to problems. And so just making sure you're watering as low to the base of the plant as possible, then you're going to be encouraging healthy plants. My second tip for watering when it comes to healthy plants, which is particularly important for seedlings and maturing plants, here I've got a row of leeks, is the idea of less but more. And what that means is water at less of a frequency, but when you do water, water more deeply. Now, this is why I am very happy leaving a soaker hose on for, say, during the period of a day or quite a few hours, but only doing it every, say, 3 to 4 days. Or if I'm going to be watering these leeks, I will give them one water, and then I'll come back, say 10 minutes later, and give them another good drench, just to make sure that all of the water is going down. Because if you're thinking about a seedling and you're trying to develop a really healthy root system, which is integral for plant health, if you want healthy, resilient plants that are going to be more drought proof, they need to have as strong of a root system as possible. And the way that you water can help influence that root system. And so if you always water quite often and it's just a little bit shallow and you just kind of, the surface looks wet, always just go underneath, because very often it is pretty bone dry underneath. All that does is that if the water is only at the surface, there's no incentive for the roots of those plants to grow downwards. And what you want to provide as the gardener is almost like a shepherd, is to provide a bit of an incentive. It's to encourage the roots to maybe go downwards, because that's where the water is. And so if you do water more deeply, so there's good moisture content within the soil, but don't do it as often, it's going to force the roots to go down searching for that water. And that is how you get really healthy seedlings, stronger root system, a plant that is better resilient towards pests and diseases, and it's going to be better at obtaining the nutrients that it needs. And also, if a plant has a stronger root system, it's going to be more stable. So I've got sweet corn growing here and field beans behind me. If these have a really weak root system and a gust of wind comes over, they're far more likely to be blown over. So another benefit as to why watering deeply but less frequently is so important. Now, if you're a new gardener and you're watching and you're thinking, oh, I've got so many different things I need to water because it hasn't rained for a while. What should I prioritize? Well, it's really important to prioritize the youngest plants first. So that's your seedlings, which I'm watering here. And these are on this wire mesh, which means they are protected from slugs, which is a massive benefit. But anything that you have sown that is really young, like all of these seedlings here, it's really important that these always get watered first, because if these dry out, it can lead to a lot of issues. And when the weather is really hot, I might need to water these at least once a day. So just focus on your youngest plants first, get them through to that semi-mature stage, and then they'll survive much better during periods of hot, dry weather. Now, there are two other gardening techniques that go hand in hand with watering. One is mulching, and the other is making your own organic natural liquid feeds, which provide supplemental nutrition whenever you're watering your plants. And for mulching, you're basically insulating the soil. You're reducing evaporation, you're increasing the moisture in the soil, and it's making your watering more effective. So check these out, and thank you very much for watching.